Look closely at how your day begins. You wake up. Before your mind is even fully awake, your hand reaches for your phone. A notification, a message, a short video. You tell yourself it will only take a second. But when you finally look up again, 30 minutes are gone. You don't remember half of what you just watched. This is not laziness, and it does not mean something is wrong with you. It means you are living in the modern world. Today your attention is under constant attack. Your phone vibrates, a new video appears, another message arrives. Music plays in the background, news updates keep refreshing, your brain jumps from one stimulus to the next, and slowly, without noticing, your ability to focus begins to leak away like water from a cracked bucket. The strange thing is that this kind of scattered attention once helped humans survive. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors lived in dangerous environments. Their survival depended on constantly scanning their surroundings. A sound in the bushes, movement in the distance, a sudden change in the wind. A distracted mind back then could mean the difference between life and death. But the world has changed. Today there are no predators hiding in the forest. The only predators are notifications. And the same survival mechanism that once protected us now quietly destroys our focus. Researchers at the University of California found something alarming. After a single interruption, the average person needs about 23 minutes to regain full concentration. 23 minutes. Think about that for a moment. Now imagine how many times you interrupt yourself during a normal day. Checking your phone, opening another browser tab, switching tasks, replying to a message. Every small distraction resets your brain. Your attention never has the chance to settle deeply into one task, and this constant fragmentation creates a strange modern problem. People feel busy all day, but almost nothing meaningful gets done. However, there is an ancient idea that offers a different approach, an idea that existed long before smartphones, social media, or endless digital noise. It comes from Zen monasteries in Japan, and its name is Ichigyo-Zammai. Ichigyo-Zammai is the practice of giving your complete attention to one action at a time. Not partial attention, not divided attention, total attention. When you work, you work. When you eat, you eat. When you listen, you truly listen. No mental multitasking, no wandering thoughts, just one action, fully experienced. At first, this sounds almost too simple to matter, but simple ideas often carry the most power. To understand why this matters, we need to look at a story, the story of a student named Jake. Jake Morrison was 16 when he realized something uncomfortable. He was falling behind, not because he was unintelligent. In fact, Jake understood complex subjects like physics and programming better than most of his classmates. But there was one problem he could never seem to fix. He could not focus. He would sit down to study. 5 minutes later, he was checking Instagram. He would open his calculus book. Then suddenly he was watching highlights from last night's basketball game. He would start an online lecture. Halfway through, he paused the video and opened another tab. This pattern repeated itself every day. The frustrating part was that Jake had a dream, a very big dream. He wanted to study computer science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. MIT, one of the most competitive universities in the world. The kind of place where the best engineers and scientists are trained. But Jake's grades told a different story. While other students consistently earned top marks, Jake stayed stuck in the middle, a C in one class, a B in another. Good enough to pass, not nearly good enough for MIT. His friends noticed, and like most teenagers, they turned it into a joke. "Jake, you want to study at MIT?" One of them laughed. "You can't even get an A in math." Another added, "Better start practicing flipping burgers." Everyone laughed. Jake laughed too. But inside it felt different. Every joke landed like a small punch to the stomach. At home, things were not much easier. His parents believed in him, but they were worried. "Jake," his mother told him one evening, "you have so much potential. You just need to focus." And that was the problem. Jake knew he had potential. He could feel it. But every time he sat down to do something important, his mind seemed to betray him. Instead of working, he drifted into imagination. He pictured himself walking across the MIT campus. He imagined building powerful software systems. He imagined proving everyone wrong. But while his mind lived in the future, the present moment stayed empty. His textbooks remained closed, assignments stayed unfinished, and the dream moved further away. Until one afternoon, everything finally collapsed. Jake received another disappointing grade on a calculus test. He stared at the paper in silence. Something inside him broke. Not anger, not sadness, just exhaustion. He was tired of feeling average, tired of disappointing his parents, tired of pretending the jokes didn't bother him. And for the first time, he admitted something honestly. He didn't need motivation. He needed help. The next day, Jake walked toward the teacher's lounge. There was one person he hoped might understand, a quiet math teacher named Mr. Tanaka, and that conversation would change everything. The next afternoon, Jake stood outside the teacher's lounge holding his backpack strap a little tighter than usual. Inside the room, teachers were packing their things and preparing to go home. The day was almost over. Jake knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Tanaka, do you have a minute?" The teacher looked up from a stack of papers and adjusted his glasses. Mr. Tanaka was known around the school for something unusual. He never raised his voice, he never rushed. Even in a noisy classroom, he seemed calm in a way that made students quiet down without being told. He gestured toward a chair. "Of course, Jake, sit down." Jake sat, but the words didn't come out immediately. For a moment, he just stared at the floor. Finally, he spoke. "I want to get better at studying. I really do. But I can't concentrate. My mind jumps everywhere. I sit down to work and 5 minutes later, I'm doing something else." Mr. Tanaka listened without interrupting. Jake continued. "I want to study computer science, maybe even apply to MIT someday. But right now I can barely focus long enough to finish homework." The room went quiet. Mr. Tanaka leaned back slightly in his chair and asked a simple question. "When you study on your computer, how many tabs do you usually have open?" Jake thought for a second. "Maybe 10, sometimes more." "And your phone?" "Next to me." "Notifications on?" Jake nodded. Mr. Tanaka smiled a little. "And while you're studying, do you also think about other things? Plans, messages, random ideas?" Jake looked surprised. "Yes, all the time." The teacher folded his hands. "Jake, when I was your age, I had the exact same problem." Jake blinked. "You did?" "I grew up in Japan," Mr. Tanaka said calmly. "And when I was young, my mind was always restless. It jumped from one thought to another, until my grandfather taught me something." The teacher reached for a small notebook, wrote 2 words, and slid the page across the desk. Jake looked down. Ichigyo-Zammai. Ichigo. "What?" Jake asked. "Ichigyo-Zammai," Mr. Tanaka repeated. "It's a concept from Zen practice. It means complete concentration on a single action." Jake frowned slightly. "So, just focusing?" Mr. Tanaka shook his head. "It goes deeper than that." He leaned forward. "When you do something, you don't simply focus on it. You become it." Jake looked confused. "When you study mathematics," the teacher continued, "there is no Jake observing the work. There is only the act of solving problems. When you eat, there is only eating. When you walk, there is only walking." Jake laughed softly. "That sounds kind of extreme." Mr. Tanaka nodded. "It is extreme, but it's also powerful." He paused for a moment and then asked another question. Have you ever played a video game for hours and completely lost track of time? Jake's face changed immediately. All the time. That, Mr. Tanaka said, is called the flow state. You become so immersed in the activity that the world around you disappears. Your brain stops wandering. Your attention locks onto one task. Jake leaned forward slightly. So Ichigyo-Zammai is like entering that state on purpose? Exactly. The teacher opened a drawer and pulled out several printed papers. Modern neuroscience has studied this deeply. Today we use words like mindfulness, deep work, or flow state, but the principle is the same. He handed the papers to Jake. These articles explain how attention works inside the brain. Jake quickly flipped through the pages. Diagrams of neurons, notes about attention control, research summaries. Mr. Tanaka continued. Every time your attention jumps from one thing to another, your brain must reset its focus. That reset consumes energy. And the more often it happens, the more your brain becomes trained to be distracted. Jake nodded slowly. That sounds exactly like me. The teacher pointed to one page. Here is something important. When you train focused attention repeatedly, the brain physically changes. The prefrontal cortex becomes stronger. This is the region responsible for concentration and impulse control. So you can literally train your brain to focus better? Yes. Jake looked at the papers again. And Ichigyo-Zammai is the training? Mr. Tanaka nodded. But the key is discipline in your environment. He raised one finger. First rule, remove distractions. Another finger. Second rule, work on only one task at a time. A third finger. Third rule, when your mind wanders, gently bring it back, again and again. No frustration, no anger, just return. Jake thought about that for a moment. That sounds harder than it looks. It is, Mr. Tanaka said calmly, but it becomes easier with practice. He leaned back again. I want you to try something tonight. Jake looked up. Create a study ritual. Put your phone in another room. Close every browser tab except the one you need. Set a timer for 25 minutes. And during that time, do only one thing. Jake nodded slowly. Just 25 minutes? Just 25. And if your mind wanders, it will wander, the teacher replied. When it does, notice it and bring it back. Jake picked up the papers carefully and placed them in his backpack. For some reason, he felt a strange mixture of curiosity and hope. Thank you, Mr. Tanaka. The teacher gave a small nod. Remember something, Jake. You are not lazy. You simply never learned how to control your attention. Jake walked home thinking about that sentence the entire way. That night, he sat at his desk and decided to try the experiment. For the first time in his life, he prepared his environment deliberately. Phone inside a drawer, notifications off, laptop open with only one tab, a small timer on the desk. He took a deep breath, then another. Then he started the timer. The first 5 minutes were torture. His brain screamed for stimulation. Check your phone. Open YouTube. See if someone texted you. Jake remembered what Mr. Tanaka said. Don't fight the distraction, just notice it, then return. So every time his mind drifted, he quietly brought it back to the problem in front of him. Again, and again, and again. By the end of the first 25 minutes, he had redirected his attention nearly a dozen times. But something interesting happened during the second round. The urges became weaker. During the third round, something even stranger happened. Jake forgot about the timer completely. For the first time in months, he was fully absorbed in the work. When the timer finally rang, he looked up in disbelief. 75 minutes had passed. And in that short time, he had solved more problems than he normally completed in an entire evening. Jake leaned back in his chair. For the first time in a long while, he felt something different. Not motivation, control. And that was the moment everything started to change. The first focused study session changed something inside Jake, but the real transformation didn't happen in one night. It happened through repetition. The next day, Jake repeated the same ritual. Phone in another room, notifications off, one tab open, timer set to 25 minutes. The first session felt difficult again. His mind still tried to escape, but something was different this time. Now he understood what was happening. Every time his attention drifted, he simply noticed it and returned to the task. No frustration, no self-criticism, just return. By the third study block that evening, Jake again felt that strange state where time moved differently. The problems in front of him stopped feeling like obstacles. They became puzzles, and for the first time, he wasn't forcing himself to study. He was inside the work. Days turned into weeks. Jake continued practicing Ichigyo-Zammai every single afternoon after school. At first, the improvement was subtle. Homework took less time. Assignments felt clearer. Concepts started connecting faster in his mind. But the biggest change wasn't in his grades yet. It was in his relationship with attention. Before, Jake's mind controlled him. Now he was learning to guide it. He also began applying the same principle outside of studying. When he ate dinner, he stopped scrolling on his phone. When he talked with friends, he actually listened instead of thinking about something else. When he walked to school, he noticed the sounds around him, the movement of people, the rhythm of the city. For years, Jake had lived on autopilot. Now he was awake. His friends noticed the difference. One afternoon at lunch, one of them asked, "Jake, man, you've been quiet lately. You barely check your phone anymore." Jake shrugged slightly. "I'm just trying to focus on school." Another friend laughed. "Trying to become an MIT genius?" The table laughed, but Jake didn't feel offended this time. He simply smiled, because now he knew something they didn't. Focus was a skill, and skills could be trained. A month later, the first big math test arrived. Jake walked into class with a strange calmness. Normally, he would feel anxious before exams. His mind would jump from question to question before even starting. But today he followed the same small ritual. 3 slow breaths, eyes on the paper, one question at a time. Ichigyo-Zammai. There was no future, no past, only the problem in front of him. When he finished the exam, he felt something unusual. Confidence. Not because he thought he was a genius, but because he had actually given his full attention. A week later, the tests were returned. Jake looked down at the paper. For a moment, he thought he had read it wrong. He stared at the grade again. It was real. The first A he had ever received in mathematics. Across the classroom, Mr. Tanaka looked at him and smiled slightly. Jake understood the message without a word being spoken. This was only the beginning. Over the following months, Jake stayed consistent with the system. Not perfect, consistent. Some days his attention wandered more. Some days he felt tired, but the rule remained simple. Remove distractions. Focus on one task. Return when the mind drifts. Slowly, his grades began rising. A in physics, A in programming, A in chemistry. His parents were stunned. One evening, his mother asked, "Jake, what happened? You used to struggle so much." Jake thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't become smarter. I just stopped dividing my attention." But the biggest lesson he learned during this period had nothing to do with grades. It was about discipline. Jake realized discipline wasn't about forcing yourself to work harder through willpower. It was about designing systems that made focus easier. Remove the phone. Simplify the environment. Work in clear blocks of time. When the system works, discipline becomes natural. At the end of his final year, Jake applied to several universities, including the one that once felt impossible. MIT. His friends still teased him. "Dude, MIT rejects people who are way smarter than us." Jake nodded. "I know, but I'm still going to try." And then he returned to what he could control, studying, preparing for exams, writing application essays, each task with complete attention. Months passed. Then one afternoon, Jake received an email notification. He almost ignored it, but when he opened the message, his heart started pounding. The first line read, "Congratulations, you have been admitted to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology." Jake read the sentence 3 times, then he stood up from his chair and shouted. His parents rushed into the room. "What happened?" Jake turned the laptop toward them. His mother covered her mouth. His father hugged him tightly. But inside, Jake felt something deeper than excitement. Gratitude. Not only for the acceptance, for the skill he had learned along the way. Because he knew something now that most people never realize. Attention is power. Years later, while studying computer science at MIT, Jake noticed something interesting. Many brilliant students struggled with focus. They were intelligent, creative, and talented, but they were constantly distracted. Social media, messages, multiple tasks at once. Jake had an advantage they didn't. The ritual, clean desk, phone away, 3 breaths, 1 task every day. And over time, that consistency separated him from the crowd. He wasn't the most brilliant student, but he became one of the most reliable. And in the long run, consistency beats scattered genius. After graduating, Jake joined a technology company as a junior programmer. He applied the same principle to his work. Every line of code received full attention. Every meeting received full presence. Every project received deep focus. Within 2 years, he was promoted. 3 years later, he became a senior developer. Eventually, he led an entire engineering team. Colleagues often asked him the same question. "Jake, what's your secret? How are you so productive?" Jake always gave the same answer. "I'm not smarter than anyone else. I just learned to protect my attention." Modern neuroscience supports this idea. Researchers studying mindfulness and focused attention have discovered something remarkable. The brain physically changes when attention is trained consistently. The region responsible for focus and decision-making, known as the prefrontal cortex, becomes stronger. At the same time, activity in the brain's default mode network decreases. This is the system responsible for mind wandering and constant internal noise. In simple terms, the more you practice returning your attention to the present task, the easier focus becomes. You are literally rewiring your brain. Attention works like a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it becomes. But the true power of Ichigyo-Zammai goes beyond productivity. It changes how you experience life itself. Think about how often people eat while scrolling through their phones. Watch movies while texting, talk to someone while thinking about something else. Most people are physically present but mentally absent. Life becomes a blur of half-experienced moments. Ichigyo-Zammai is the opposite. It brings you fully into the present. When you eat, you taste the food. When you listen, you truly hear. When you work, you immerse yourself completely. And strangely enough, this presence creates something many people are searching for: satisfaction. Because happiness rarely comes from having more things. It comes from fully experiencing the moments you already have. Jake understood this. That restless 16-year-old who couldn't focus for 5 minutes had become someone capable of deep attention. Not because he was special, but because he trained a skill that most people neglect: directing attention. And in the end, that skill quietly shapes everything. Your work, your relationships, your learning, your future. Because your life is nothing more than the sum of the moments you give your attention to. So the question becomes simple. Where are you placing yours? One thing at a time, full attention. That is how the path begins.